All right, here we go. So we're going to talk about pathology, pathologist, disease, things like that. When we are talking about disease, we can define it as a number of ways. One of the things that we can define disease as is really anything that's abnormal going on in your body. So that could be things, like bruises, cuts, mental disorders. In addition to that, we can talk about pathogens, those things that make you sick that come from the outside. Not necessarily chemicals or things like that, but well, we're going to talk about biological pathogens. Okay, so what is pathology? Let's break the word apart. First of all, pathology is the study of disease. Patho means disease, and logy, as you know from all the logies you've done in your life, means the study of. And someone who's a pathologist is someone who studies diseases. You can be a clinical pathologist, you can be a forensic pathologist. There's all kinds of different pathology types of careers out there that require some advanced training, but it's a field where your job is to determine disease, transmission of disease, and things like that, and how to prevent disease. So pathogens, pathology, you can study the pathology of what makes a plant sick. You can study the pathology of what makes a human sick. So it's not just humans, it's all kinds of living creatures. We're just going to talk about humans. Sorry about that. So pathogens categories, let's talk about those briefly. A pathogen is any infectious biological agent that causes disease. First of all, infectious, we're talking about something that has to get in you or on you and cause a disease. As far as biological agents go, okay, biological agents makes it sound like it has to be something that is living. Okay, it doesn't necessarily have to be something that is living. However, generally speaking, biological agents are things that come from previously living things or rely on living things for their survival. So let's keep that in mind as we go forward and talk about different pathogens. Okay, so different pathogens we will encounter. We'll be talking about bacteria, fungi, viruses, prions, and then a few other categories, a few other things that don't fit these categories. Basically, we're going to talk about parasites because they don't fit into one of these categories. Okay, so we can look at pathogens. Some of them are pathogens that have to have a host in order to survive. Okay, there are certain types of parasites. There are also some viruses that need a host in order to survive. They're called obligate pathogens. Obligate, okay, they are obligated to be inside a host in order to survive. Tuberculosis is a classic example. Tuberculosis doesn't survive outside a host. There are some pathogens that are opportunistic, meaning that they will only cause disease in someone with a weakened immune system. The flu is one. Okay, the flu can basically get anybody, certain strains of it. But if you have a weakened immune system, then you are especially susceptible to catching things like the flu. People who are having their immune system suppressed because of like cancer treatments or immunosuppressants because of an autoimmune disorder like lupus or something like that, those people are um, much more likely to get an opportunistic pathogen simply because their immune system can't fight it off because it's been weakened. And then finally, we have ones called accidental pathogens. These ones, like it says, only infect a host when they accidentally get transmitted there. Um, Generally, they don't infect a host unless there is some reason that they get transmitted and they weren't supposed to. Okay, so accidental pathogens, these are a little more rare. And oftentimes emerging diseases like you watched in the Darwin video, those are accidental because they didn't used to infect, but then some mutation occurred or some environmental change occurred, and then they infected a new host. Okay, so we're going to talk about bacteria first, and this diagram is kind of gross because if you think about it, if you were to count the number of bacteria living on you and in you, it may outnumber the cells of your own body. It's amazing how many bacteria live on you and in you. Many of them are completely harmless. Some of them are extremely beneficial, and others are constantly trying to make you sick if they possibly could. So they have examples like the nose, the mouth and the throat, the gut, the skin. For females, the vagina and the stomach. There's bacteria in all of these places. And many of them, especially ones in the gut, are there and they support you in a number of ways, like providing vitamins and breaking down certain substances that you can't break down yourself. And so many of them are beneficial. So just this is a review. You should have this from biology. Prokaryotic means they don't have a nucleus. They're simple organisms. They divide by binary fission. They just basically make a copy of their DNA and they split in half. They can divide very rapidly given the right conditions. They're found everywhere on Earth. If you've ever talked about in biology about archaebacteria, those are some extreme bacteria that can live in like salt, and they can live in geothermal vents and all kinds of extreme places, but they're found everywhere. The vast majority of them are not infectious. The vast majority of them don't interact with you on a daily basis anyway. Okay, so we will look at bacteria and just quickly classify them based on two characteristics. We look at them in terms of their shape and in terms of their arrangement. So to talk about bacterial shape, there are three basic shapes for bacteria. All right, the first is that they are rod-shaped. The technical term for that is a bacillus. The plural of that is bacilli. And then you have spheres, which are coccyx, and you have spirillum, which are spirals. So you can see the pictures are showing up over on the right-hand side. Those are like kind of bar or rod-shaped. Coccyx are little balls, and spirilli are literally spiral-shaped bacteria. Some of the worst ones, bacterial infections, things like, oh, I just blanked for a second. Things like certain sexually transmitted diseases like syphilis are caused by spirillum types of bacteria. Yeah, we can look at them also in terms of how they are arranged, because oftentimes bacteria, they either live alone or they live with other bacteria of the same type, and the way they arrange themselves will be different based on how they live. Okay, so first they can live individually. They can live paired, so we give that the prefix diplo, and you can add that to any of the shapes. So diplococcus, diplobacillus, diplospirillum, although those don't usually do that. They can form chains. Okay, straight chains. Strepto literally means straight. Diplo meant two. Strepto means straight, so you can have straight chains of, say, coccyx, so streptococci, or you could have streptobacillus. Okay, or they can form clusters, and we call those staphylo, and that kind of means like a cluster of grapes. All right, you can see on the picture down there at the bottom, there's examples of diplo, strepto, and staphylo using the coccyx bacteria. As far as the types of things, here's some examples of bacterial strains that can cause trouble. First, we have E. coli, Escherichia coli, which is shown in the green. Okay, the E. coli, there's lots and lots and lots of strains of E. coli. There are some that are completely harmless that live inside your gut and don't cause you any trouble. Unfortunately, there are lots and lots and lots of strains that are very harmful. They're called, some of them are called enteropathogenic, enterohemorrhagic. Okay, basically these types of E. coli that cause problems, most of them are found in the gut, and if they get into your gut, they can cause hemorrhaging, they can cause diarrhea, they can cause all kinds of bad things. So if you hear about an E. coli spreading through, say, tainted lettuce or things like that, they're just talking about the bad kind. Okay, Staphylococcus aureus. If you've ever heard of MRSA, methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, that's a infection that people can pick up. This is one that wrestlers get sometimes. You can pick it up in a hospital if you have an injury, if you have surgery, and it's just nasty because it's resistant to a lot of antibiotics, and it can cause loss of limbs. It can even cause death. All right, it's a bad one. If you've ever had strep throat, you've had a streptococcus infection. Usually it's strep A. And that's just a long chain of round bacteria, a particular type of bacteria, which, sore throat, general fatigue, things like that. And then the other one there, which is actually shown at the right, is called Salmonella enterica. My brother had this when we were young. We went to my aunt and uncle's house up in the suburbs, and he drank like half a gallon of milk, and he loved it because it was like sweet. Well, the reason it was sweet was because it was tainted with salmonella. And we got home, and by the following evening, he was having just absolutely horrible diarrhea, got super dehydrated, ended up having salmonella. He was tied to the toilet for a couple of days and lost lots of weight. Of course, I think he was in 7th or 8th grade at the time. Turned out there was some tainted milk that was sold by the Jewel food stores up there. When he was like 17, he got some sort of a settlement because of that, and they sent him money, which was really cool. But for me as a younger brother, it was awesome to see him tied to the toilet pooping all day. All right. New type of pathogen, funguses, fungi. All right, so fungi, you can see that's a classic one right there in the picture. These are saprophytes. Saprophyte literally means plant-like organisms that cause decay. Okay, if you think of, if you've ever walked through the woods and you've seen like a rotting tree trunk or something like that, most of that rot is happening because of funguses. Oftentimes you can see some funguses if you look closely. They can be infectious, especially people who have weakened immune systems. Okay, there are some skin funguses like what's in the picture, but there are some funguses that can get inside of you that are really bad. Uh, if you have a fungal infection, they call that a mycosis, or multiple would be mycoses. Okay, so here's some common ones. Athlete's foot. If you've never had this, I don't wish that on you. It's basically a fungal infection on your feet, between your toes. It causes itchiness, crackiness. There are lots of remedies out there. Some people get it really bad and they have to get a prescription, but basically that's athlete's foot. Valley fever. This is one that's found in, I think it's the San Joaquin Valley in Arizona mainly. Basically, it's the American Southwest. People get this valley fever. It's caused by a fungus. It's only found down there. It's not found across the United States. I don't know exactly how many causes a year, like 150,000 cases a year. It's not generally fatal, but it's just one of those things that is common to a particular area because of the fungal population that lives there. Histoplasmosis, which is kind of a Midwest thing. I don't think it's super common in Illinois, but it does do have outbreaks of histoplasmosis. And then yeast infections caused by Candida albicans, which is a strain of yeast. It's found on your skin naturally, and most of the time you have bacteria that kind of keep it in balance. But when bacterial imbalances occur, you can end up with a yeast infection. Oftentimes, people get yeast infections after they've been on an antibiotic because those antibiotics kill the bad bacteria, but they also sometimes kill the good bacteria that are keeping this yeast in check. And so that can lead to a yeast infection. Next type of pathogen is a virus. This is kind of what we're aiming for. All right. Because all of us are trying to stay away from coronavirus. The thing about viruses is they are very, very simple. They're very, very simple, but oftentimes they're very, very difficult to defeat. Okay. They're really only made up of genetic material inside an envelope of some sort. All right. Whether it's a protein or some other type of envelope. But basically, it's not a living thing. Okay, people are talking about the coronavirus. How do we kill it? Well, you can't kill something that's not living. Really, you need to destroy it. Okay, they're not living because they don't meet some of the criteria that living things are supposed to meet. First of all, they don't do any chemical reactions. The only thing they do is find a host and inject their genetic material. All right, and hope for the best. They cannot reproduce on their own. They rely on a host to reproduce the genetic material, which the genetic material contains instructions for reproducing new virus. That's really all they have. They can't move. Okay, they rely on things like droplets of sneeze. Okay, when you sneeze, all right, if you have coronavirus, it spreads that way, or by being dripped onto a surface and then finding someone touching that and touching their face. All right, so they can't move on their own. They rely on movement through the air or on surfaces being deposited by people who have it or animals that have it. They don't do any respiration. All right, they're not using oxygen. They're not producing carbon dioxide. They don't eat. Okay, they don't require any kind of an energy source. Basically, once they're formed, as long as they're in the right environment, they will be viable, meaning they can be picked up and cause an infection. And they don't have any cellular structures. There's no cell membrane. There's no nucleus. There's none of those things. Okay, here's some diagrams of different types of viruses. This kind of goes along with the web quest that you did yesterday. And you have, for example, the tobacco mosaic virus. That was one of the ones that was in the web quest, the TMA. That's one that affects the tobacco plant. It's one of the earliest identified viruses. And then there's other viruses here. Influenza, you can see, kind of resembles the coronavirus in terms of it's got all the spikes sticking out of it. And then bacteriophages, that was one that they mentioned yesterday. I think T4 was one of the examples in the web quest. A bacteriophage, bacterio means bacteria, phage means to eat. So these are viruses that go in and infect bacteria and then destroy them. Here's kind of a diagram to keep things in perspective. Okay, a virus, as you can see in the diagram, is really, really small compared to a bacterium, which is really, really small compared to an animal cell. So a virus, like thousands of viruses, can fit into a bacterium, which thousands of those can fit into an animal cell. So they're teeny tiny little chunks of DNA with a protein coat, but they can cause all kinds of mayhem, as you know, because you're sitting at home. Okay, we're going to move on to a weird type of pathogen. Prions are really strange, and really what they are is they're just proteins that have been folded incorrectly. Um, Generally, what happens is this is oftentimes a genetic thing, or it's something that you somehow get into your body from a source, and then it affects the proteins in your body and causes illness. And there are some of these that are really, really nasty, and we'll get to those in a minute. They don't contain any genetic material, so they're not really like reproducing. However, they can cause disease. If you've ever heard of chronic wasting disease in deer, okay, that was a big deal in Illinois a few years ago, or mad cow disease, bovine spongiform encephalopathy. Okay, encephalopathy, encephalo means brain, pathy means disease. So this was a type of disease that attacked cow brains. All right. But basically, what you have for these types of diseases, I'm going to give you some examples. Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. Okay, this is not mad cow disease, but it's like what it would be if it were the human form. Basically, what you have in Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease is you have a protein in your brain. Once someone is diagnosed with Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, they have about a maximum of a year. If you're diagnosed with this, CJD is what they abbreviate it as, you are going to die. It is always fatal. There are no treatments for it. Basically, you just try to keep people comfortable until their death arrives. So it's pretty awful. Gerstmann-Straussler-Scheinker syndrome. This is similar to Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. It's fairly rare. All of these are rare. But basically, it's a similar thing. Your brain is attacked by defective proteins. Fatal familial insomnia. There's only a few families on Earth that have this. It is totally hereditary. You pass this down, and basically what happens is the proteins in your thalamus. We talked about the thalamus last chapter. Okay, the thalamus is involved with your sleep-wake cycle, and what happens is these proteins disrupt your sleep-wake cycle, and you literally cannot sleep. All right, and it develops over time. Okay, the older you get, and then at some point it gets to the point where you cannot sleep. You end up with paranoia and hallucinations, and eventually you die of basically exhaustion because you can't get rest. And then Kuru, this is an interesting one because this is one that I believe was found in Papua New Guinea a number of years ago, and it's due to people eating other people. Really, what it is, this is a brain disease. It's a brain prion. And what they would do in Papua New Guinea, one of the traditions there was they would, when a relative died, they would eat their brain. And I'm not sure exactly why, if it was like to keep their memories or something, but there was some sort of reason why they would eat their loved ones' brains when they passed away. Well, the problem is this prion disease, if it was present in one person, and they died, and then their whole family ate them, well, then all of the family would get it, and then they would die, and then their family, the extended family, would eat them, and so on and so forth. So you see how it could be a real problem. But that's kind of an interesting one. It was passed by cannibalism. Okay. So prions, really the biggest issue, like I said briefly, was that they're misshapen proteins, and what they do is when they get into a human or into a host, is they actually cause the normal versions to change shape as well. And so your normal proteins that your body manufactures normally, if there's prions present, it changes them. All right. So then the whole thing with proteins is that shape determines function. All right. You have this string of amino acids that are put in a very particular order by your genetics, and then they're folded, all right, into a particular shape. And if that shape is correct, the protein works. And if that shape is incorrect, the protein does not work. And in fact, it can cause disease and homeostatic imbalances and things like that. All right, last category of pathogens, we're going to talk about parasites. Okay, parasites, these are basically anything that's not one of the other categories we kind of call parasites, and there's a wide range of different types of parasites. All right, and basically we have endoparasites. Endo means inside, so these are parasites that get into your body and cause disease. And then there's ectoparasites. These are ones that stay on the surface of the body. And this is true for most creatures, that there's both endo and ectoparasites. So speaking first of some endoparasites, here are some examples. Okay, there is a protozoan that causes malaria. Okay, it comes from a mosquito. This mosquito carries it. It's called the Anopheles mosquito. And basically the mosquito bites you, it injects this parasite that lives in the mosquito's gut, and then that starts dividing you and it causes malaria, which has killed more people on Earth than any other disease in the history of mankind. And then there's an amoeba that causes amoebic dysentery, which causes horrible diarrhea, dehydration, and potentially death. And then there's parasitic worms. Okay, some of these worms get in from you eating food that's not properly cooked. There are some worms that can get in if you're walking barefoot through an area where they're common. There are some worms that can get into you if you're swimming in water where they happen to live. And so there's all kinds of worms. And basically what they do is they get inside of you and they have a very complex life cycle where they reproduce. And oftentimes you're spreading these worms once they've gotten inside of you because their life cycle is such that their eggs need to get out of you to spread to a new host. All right, as far as ecto means outside. So ectoparasites, things like insects and arachnids that sit on the surface of your body and they chow down on your delicious flesh. So ticks, okay, so a tick embeds its head in your body and sucks your blood. Okay, ticks are bad because they can spread things like Lyme disease. Rocky Mountain spotted fever, I believe, is caused by ticks. And so they can carry other diseases as well. So they're a pathogen parasite that's taking your blood, but they can also inject you with other parasites or other pathogens. So it's a double whammy with ticks. Scabies, all right, this is a little creature that lives on your skin. It eats your skin cells and causes all kinds of gross things. Head and pubic lice. Okay, if you've ever had head lice, you know what that's like. Okay, they get in your hair. They feed on your dead skin cells and blood and everything else, and then you have to use chemicals or, I don't know, I've heard all kinds of treatments, mayonnaise, whatever, to kill them. And then mosquitoes. Okay, mosquitoes themselves are a parasite because they suck your blood, but they can also then transmit other pathogens as well, like malaria, and then West Nile virus and things like that. Okay, that's a lot of pathogen talk. It really, really is. I'm going to leave the review questions to you for today. I'll read them to you. If a bacterium will only infect a host when the host's immune system is already weakened, how could this pathogen be classified? And it's going to be one of the three choices, whether it's obligate pathogens, opportunistic pathogens, or accidental pathogens. Think about that for a minute. What is the term for bacterium that is arranged in a pair of spheres? What are the 5 types of pathogens? A parasite only feeds on the internal tissues of the host. How would this parasite be classified? All right, so those are some review questions for you to consider as you finish up this presentation, and we will come back to them tomorrow. Coming up, we're going to talk a little about how your body defends itself, okay, the immune response, and so I think that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed this presentation and got something out of it, and you'll be seeing some of these things as we go forward.